Hi friends, Ione here, and today I learned that it was Mental Health Awareness Week. And so I thought that I would do some videos that would go out each day this week because I don't know about you, but I have been struggling with my mental health in this current climate. In fact, today I read a paragraph in the New York Times daily briefing email, and it upset me so deeply that I just felt really hopeless and helpless and low. And it wasn't even an article. It was a paragraph in a newsletter. There's a lot of stuff going on that I feel that I know is making me feel anxious and depressed and low at times. It's a bit like a roller coaster. Some days I'm fine and on top of the world and, I'm focused and excited and I find joy in things and, I'm speaking to friends and they're not feeling great and I'm just like, things are okay, we got this. And then other days, like today, it just comes crashing down. And so I know I'm not alone in this whole experience. And so that's why I wanted to do these videos. So I just want to kick this all off by saying that it's okay to be where you're at. It makes perfect sense that you might be feeling a little bit unnerved and unsettled and sad and stressed or anxious and low. Makes total sense. And I think it's really important that we have compassion with ourselves when we're in that situation and treat ourselves with a bit of kindness. I know that when I've experienced depression in the past, I've been very angry at myself, just beating myself up for how I was feeling. And I just think that it's nicer and it's a lot easier when we treat ourselves with a bit of compassion and kindness. The other thing that I want to touch on in this first video is this idea of identifying the things that trigger these feelings of anxiety or depression or real low moods. What triggers that? I've become very good or just very hyper aware of what it is. I knew that thing that I read today made me feel really hopeless about the future of humanity. It was quite a leap from the thing I read to that feeling of just despair and hopelessness, but that was definitely the thing that triggered it. Other things that trigger me are feelings of financial uncertainty when things aren't going well in businesses or with money and I'm worried about that. Feelings of loneliness or lack of human connection, that type of stuff really sets me off. And so I think it's good to know when these things happen so that you can mediate them. Try to do things where you don't have to experience them as much. Or when you know that that's happening, or when you're in this vulnerable position or in a place that normally triggers you to feel this certain way, that you've got things in place, that you've got support lined up that can help you weather that storm and get through that a bit more easily. So at the end of each of these videos this week, I'm going to recommend an episode of the Uplifting Content Podcast that I think might be great for further listening. And for today's one, I am going to end this with a clip from my interview with Johann Hari, who is an amazing author and journalist who wrote a book called Lost Connections: The Real Causes for Depression and the Unexpected Solutions. He goes into a lot of detail of some of the reasons why we feel depressed, and it comes down to broken connections between each other, broken connections between us living our purpose and our passion, broken connections between a lot of things. So I'm going to leave you with a clip from that episode. If it piques your interest, have a listen to the podcast, and I'll be back tomorrow with another little video on getting help. Bye.
Depression is a signal that your deepest needs are not being met.
Yeah.
And we don't want to pathologize that signal, right? What we want to do is listen to that signal, honor it, and help the individual to get through it. It's an alarm bell going off. The fact that such a huge number of people around us are depressed and anxious is telling us something's gone really wrong with the way we live. And instead of saying that they're all just crazy and they need to be drugged, there's value for drugs, but instead of just saying that, we need to listen to them and solve the problem. There's a really dark example of this. This is one of the things that really shocked me in the research. So in the 1970s, something was discovered about depression that was regarded as so inconvenient that it was kind of, well, shut away. So in the 1970s, American psychiatrists for the first time drew up a checklist of symptoms for depression and anxiety, right? So that you could have kind of standardized diagnosis across the whole country, right? So it's a list of 10 symptoms, pretty obvious things like feeling worthless, persistent low mood. And what they said to psychiatrists and doctors is, if someone shows more than 5 of these symptoms for more than 2 weeks, you should diagnose them with depression, right? And give them care. So they send all this out and psychiatrists start using it. But what happened next was really interesting. Loads of psychiatrists start to come back and go, well, we've got a problem here. If we just use this checklist like you've told us, we should be diagnosing every single grieving person as mentally ill. Because everyone who's lost someone they love shows these symptoms, right? So the psychiatrists meet again, they're like, oh, right, okay. So they invented something called the grief loophole, the grief exception, where they basically say, use all these symptoms to diagnose people unless someone they love has died in the last year, in which case it doesn't count, right? So they start using that again. But that started to beg all these questions. Wait a minute. You're telling us that depression is a chemical imbalance in the brain that we just diagnose with a checklist, except in one case, where there's one case where it's actually a response to something in the person's life. But why is that the only thing in life that means that you might reasonably feel this way? Why not if you've lost your house? Why not if you've lost your job? Why not if you're stuck in a shit job for the next 40 years? Why, once you admit that there's a context to it, that it's not just a chemical imbalance that you can diagnose in a checklist, that opens up a whole other conversation. And that was so inconvenient that they just got rid of the grief exception. It doesn't exist anymore. So now, if your baby dies at 10 a.m., you could be diagnosed, straight away with a mental illness. In fact, Dr. Johann Hari, whose own baby died in childbirth, Cheyenne, has done this research. 32% of grieving parents in the United States are drugged in the first 48 hours, which disrupts the grief. And you think that shows how much we've missed, as Joanne says to me, it just shows that we don't understand human suffering. No. Grief isn't a pathology. We grieve because we've loved, right? Yeah. Grief is a form of love. And I think the fact that depression and grief have the same symptoms also tells us something. I think depression is a form of grief for your own life not going as it should, for your own needs not being met.